A German pilot told his commander he shot it down. Twice. The truth is, it never crashed. But listen to this, it cost less than the price of a pair of boots. British factories built it from scrap pipe and stamped sheet metal, with parts farmed out to toy makers, bicycle shops, even corset factories. Soldiers called it the plumber's nightmare. Some called it the stench gun. One officer compared firing it to throwing rocks and hoping for the best. And yet, this ugly, cheap, mass-produced piece of plumbing became one of the most important weapons of the Second World War. It armed the French resistance. It armed partisans in Poland, in Norway, in the Philippines. The Germans were so impressed by how easy it was to manufacture that they copied it outright, building their own version in the war's final, desperate months. This is the story of how the worst-looking gun of World War II became one of its most decisive. To understand why Britain built a $9 submachine gun, you have to go back to a beach in northern France. June 1940. German soldiers had stormed across Western Europe in less than a month, and the beaches at Dunkirk were filled with the wreckage of a broken army. Over 10 desperate days, the Royal Navy, backed by a fleet of civilian boats, pulled off something close to a miracle. More than 330,000 soldiers were pulled off those sands and brought home. But an evacuation is not a victory. It's a controlled collapse. And in the chaos of getting men off those beaches, Britain left almost everything else behind. Nearly 2,500 artillery pieces, 85,000 vehicles, including 445 tanks, 75,000 tons of ammunition, 416,000 tons of supplies, 11,000 machine guns. Britain's army had just escaped France with its life and almost none of its weapons. Now picture the summer that followed. Germany controlled the entire coast of Western Europe, just 20 miles of water away. An invasion of Britain seemed not just possible, but imminent, and Britain's answer was to call up ordinary civilians, the Home Guard. 1.5 million men by July of 1940 asked to defend their country. There was just one problem. The Guards were so short of weapons that they were sometimes forced to drill with broomsticks, eliciting nervous laughter from the very public they were supposed to protect. Imagine that. The last line of defense against a German invasion, training with sticks, because there weren't enough rifles to go around. Britain tried the obvious solution first, buying weapons from the only major industrial power not yet at war. They purchased Thompson submachine guns from the United States, but American factories couldn't keep up with demand. And after 1941, most of those Thompsons were redirected to the US military itself. Britain was on its own, so a decision was made. Britain would design and build its own submachine gun, something that could be manufactured quickly, cheaply, and without skilled labor. The task fell to two men, Major Reginald Vernon Shepard, an inspector of armaments who'd been pulled back into service after retirement, and Harold John Turpin, a senior draftsman at the Royal Small Arms Factory in Enfield. Working mostly after hours, squeezing the project around their regular jobs, the two men began designing in December of 1940. Turpin built parts of the prototype in his own home workshop. 36 days later, the first working gun existed. They called it the T-40. Turpin 1940. By March of 1941, it had a new name and a new job. Approval came through on the 7th of March. 100,000 units ordered immediately. The name came from the designers themselves. S for Shepard, T for Turpin, and EN for Enfield. The Sten. Here's what made the Sten almost unbelievable for its time. Not what it could do, but what it didn't need. A blowback-operated weapon, made mostly from stamped sheet metal and a few welds. It took only 5.5 man-hours to build one gun, start to finish. Out of 47 total parts, only 2, the barrel and the bolt, needed actual precision machining. Everything else could be stamped out by workers with no specialized training at all, on equipment that had, in some cases, been making something else entirely the week before. The cost was the part that stunned people most, roughly $9 to $10 per gun. Today, that's around $130, for an entire functioning weapon. Compare that to the Thompson submachine gun Britain had been desperately trying to buy from America, which cost many times more and took far longer to produce. This is where the Sten's reputation problem began. It looked exactly like what it was: a war emergency weapon built from the cheapest possible materials with absolutely nothing extra. Early models still had some wood and a flash hider, almost like the designers were embarrassed and tried to dress it up. But that didn't last. The Mark II version, the one most people picture when they hear Sten gun, stripped away even that. No wood, no flash hider, just a tube, a stock made from a single bent strut, and a magazine sticking out sideways like an afterthought. Soldiers were not impressed. Word spread fast. The plumber's nightmare. Because that's exactly what it resembled. Something a plumber might assemble from spare pipe fittings in a garage, not a weapon meant to keep a soldier alive in close combat. And there was a reason for the unflattering nicknames beyond just looks. The magazine fed from the side, not the bottom, and it was a design borrowed in spirit from an earlier gun called the Lanchester, itself a copy of a German weapon. The side feed kept the gun more compact, but it caused real reliability problems if it got dirty or knocked around, which in combat it always did. Mud, sand, and grit could jam the action. Soldiers in North Africa and later in Normandy learned to baby the magazine and clean it obsessively, because a jam in the middle of a firefight could be fatal. But here is the thing about cheap, simple weapons in a desperate war. Reliability problems on paper matter a lot less than the simple fact of existing in the hands of someone who needs to fight back, because the Sten wasn't just issued to regular soldiers. It was dropped by parachute in unmarked crates in the dead of night into occupied Europe. This is where the story stops being about a flawed standard issue weapon and starts being about something much bigger. The Sten's true genius wasn't in a firing range or a training exercise. It was in a farmhouse basement in occupied France or a forest hideout in Poland, where a resistance fighter with zero formal weapons training needed something they could learn to use in an afternoon, hide under a coat, and fix themselves if it broke. The simplicity that British generals found embarrassing was exactly what made the Sten perfect for irregular warfare. 47 parts. No precision tooling required for field repairs. A design so basic that occupied workshops, risking execution if discovered, could manufacture entire guns from raw materials smuggled past German checkpoints. In Poland, resistance engineers didn't just use the Sten. They reverse-engineered it and built their own variant, modified for what they needed. The British Special Operations Executive, the organization tasked with arming and supporting resistance movements across occupied Europe, leaned on the Sten constantly. It could be broken down into pieces small enough to fit in a bicycle pannier, a suitcase, even strapped along someone's leg under a coat. A rifle could not do that. A rifle announces itself the second someone sees you carrying it. A Sten gun, disassembled, looked like nothing at all. Picture a French resistance courier riding through a German checkpoint with the barrel of a Sten gun wrapped in cloth, lashed to the frame of a bicycle. The receiver hidden inside a hollowed loaf of bread in the front basket. This wasn't an isolated story. This was standard practice across occupied Europe, because the Sten's entire design philosophy, born out of British desperation in 1940, turned out to be exactly what a desperate resistance fighter needed in 1943. And the most remarkable validation of the design didn't come from Britain at all. It came from the enemy. By late 1944, Germany itself was running out of everything: materials, factories, skilled labor, time. The Wehrmacht needed weapons for last-ditch defense, for the Volkssturm, the home guard of old men and teenage boys being thrown into the war's final months. And what did German engineers turn to as a template? Not their own sophisticated MP40. They copied the Sten almost exactly, calling it the Gerät Potsdam, and produced a related variant called the MP308. The irony writes itself: Germany, the industrial power that had spent years mocking British equipment, was now stamping out cheap copies of Britain's Plumber's Nightmare, because it was the only design simple enough for a collapsing war machine to still produce. By the time production ended, roughly 4 million Sten guns had been built in every variant, making it the second most produced submachine gun of the entire war, behind only the Soviet PP-41, 4 million guns born from a 6-week design process undertaken by 2 men working after hours, using parts smuggled out of a relocated drawing office that had to flee London to escape the Blitz. The Sten story isn't just one weapon, it's 5 generations of the same idea, each one stripped down further than the last. The Mark I was the original, the version with wood furniture and a flash hider, almost apologetic in its design, like the engineers couldn't quite let go of looking like a proper gun. About 100,000 of these were built before Britain decided even that was too much luxury for a wartime weapon. Then came the Mark II, and this is the version most people picture when they hear the words Sten gun. Every unnecessary piece gone, no wood, no flash hider, a stock reduced to a single bent strut. This became the workhorse of the entire war. Over 2 million built, the standard issue weapon for British and Commonwealth forces everywhere from North Africa to Normandy. It saw its first combat test on the 19th of August 1942 at a French port called Dieppe. Nearly 5,000 Canadian soldiers stormed those beaches in a raid that, by any measure, was a disaster. 60% of the men who landed were killed, wounded, or captured by early afternoon. But buried inside that catastrophe was the Sten's baptism of fire, and the reviews from the men carrying it were brutally honest. One Canadian soldier, John Edmondson, rounded the corner of a building and came face to face with a German soldier. He pulled the trigger, a dull thud, a misfire. He ducked back, tried again, thud, nothing. He threw the gun on the ground and picked up a fallen rifle instead. 2 years later, fighting through Normandy, Edmondson made it a personal rule. Every new weapon got cleaned and test-fired before he trusted his life to it. That misfire wasn't a freak accident, it was a known flaw. The early Mark IIs had a tendency to jam on the very first shot, sometimes ejecting an entire magazine's worth of ammunition in one uncontrolled burst instead of firing single rounds like the soldier intended. Commandos worked out a fix in the field, a sharp, practiced strike on the cocking handle. Once the gun had fired a few rounds and warmed up, the problem usually disappeared. Soldiers learned to live with a weapon that needed to be woken up properly before it would behave. And yet, despite the misfires, despite Dieppe, despite the nickname, the gun kept earning grudging respect in exactly the kind of fighting it was built for. Close range, indoors. Urban combat where a battle might be decided in the time it takes to clear a doorway. A British paratrooper named Alan Lee put it simply, not reliable past 100 yards, but for anything close, it never let him down. The gun's rate of fire, over 500 rounds a minute, turned narrow hallways and stairwells into a one-sided fight every time. Troops even found uses for the Sten beyond shooting it. When German soldiers were holed up behind a window, some Allied troops would arm a Sten, switch it to automatic, and throw the entire weapon through the glass like a grenade. On impact, the gun would fire wildly on its own inside the room. It wasn't elegant, it worked. After the Mark II came the Mark III, even cheaper to produce, with the barrel and receiver welded into one single tube instead of separate parts. Then a Mark IV, designed specifically for airborne troops, which never made it past the prototype stage. The final major version, the Mark V, told a different story entirely. By 1944, the threat of a German invasion of Britain was long gone, and for the first time, engineers were allowed to build a Sten properly, instead of just quickly. The Mark V came with a proper wooden stock, a proper pistol grip, and sights borrowed from Britain's standard service rifle, good enough to even mount a bayonet. This was the version handed to elite airborne troops, and it had its combat debut in September 1944, dropping into the Netherlands with British paratroopers during the Battle of Arnhem. There's something almost poetic in that progression. The Sten began as Britain's most desperate improvisation, A gun designed in 36 days because there was nothing else. It ended the war as a refined, trusted weapon good enough for the airborne forces leading Britain's most ambitious operations. The same basic idea slowly earning the respect it never had on day one. By the war's end, every version combined, close to 4 million Stens had been built. Production lines in Britain, in Canada, and eventually in the hands of resistance fighters who built their own. At one Canadian factory in Long Branch, Ontario, the workforce assembling these guns was almost entirely women. 3 out of every 4 workers on the line. The official wartime magazine covering their work noted something darkly practical. Absenteeism on that production line was almost non-existent because every worker remembered exactly why the guns mattered. The Sten story didn't end in 1945. The war stopped, but the gun didn't disappear. Britain knew from the start that the Sten was never meant to last. Military planners were already studying replacements as early as 1942, treating the entire design as a stopgap to survive the emergency, not a long-term standard. But stopgaps have a habit of outliving the crisis that created them. The basic blueprint, cheap, simple, buildable by anyone with stamping equipment and basic tools, turned out to be just as valuable in peacetime conflicts as it had been in 1940. Guerrilla movements and insurgent forces across the world kept copying the design for decades after the war ended, because the same qualities that made it perfect for the French resistance made it perfect for any irregular force without access to a national arms industry. A handful of moving parts, no specialized factory required. A gun that could, quite literally, be built in someone's garage from plumbing fittings, which is exactly what soldiers had been joking about since 1941. And in one of history's stranger footnotes, the gun's influence reached back to the enemy that had inspired its creation in the first place. Germany, the country whose MP-40 submachine guns had triggered Britain's desperate scramble back in 1939. Spent the final year of the war building its own crude copy of the weapon it had once outclassed. By 1945, German factories were turning out the Gerät Potsdam, a near-identical clone of the Sten Mark II, because the Reich's once formidable industrial base had collapsed to the point where only the simplest possible design could still be manufactured. The MP-3008 followed soon after, built from whatever materials remained. Think about what that means. The weapon Britain built in a moment of total vulnerability, mocked, nicknamed, distrusted by the very soldiers who carried it, ended the war as the design template for a collapsing Nazi war machine. The Plumber's nightmare outlasted the empire that inspired it. So was the Sten a good gun, by the standards of a peacetime army, with time to train soldiers properly and machine precision parts? Probably not. It jammed. It looked terrible. Soldiers genuinely hated carrying it at first. But the question Britain faced in the summer of 1940 wasn't, what is the best submachine gun we could design? It was, what gun can we put into 1 million hands before the Germans land? And by that measure, the measure that actually mattered in 1940, the Sten wasn't a failure. It was precisely what was needed. A $9 gun designed by 2 men in 36 days, built by unskilled workers in toy factories and corset shops, distributed to farmers and teachers and bicycle couriers who became soldiers overnight, and it held a desperate, broken empire together long enough to fight back. That's not a flawed weapon. That's a country refusing to lose.